updated for the MS-102 skills measured as of April 28, 2026. This MS-102 practice exam contains 45 expert-level questions. Read each scenario paragraph first, isolate the operational constraints, and choose the answer that satisfies every requirement. After the options, you will hear "lock in your answer." Then you get exactly 3 seconds of silence. Pause if you need more time. The reveal includes the complete correct answer, a concise explanation, and the full exam clue. Linked case context is read once and remains visible for its 3-question packet. Question 1 of 45. Contoso tracks an identity-focused Microsoft Secure Score improvement action. An approved third-party identity proxy now enforces an equivalent control for every in-scope user, but Microsoft cannot detect that implementation. The CISO wants Secure Score to reflect the mitigation without claiming that Microsoft implemented or verified it. What should the security administrator do? Option A. Mark the action as completed through Microsoft and attach the third-party proxy logs. Option B. Mark the improvement action as resolved through a third party and attach the implementation evidence. Option C. Mark the improvement action as accepted risk because Microsoft cannot detect the third-party control. Option D. Create a custom exposure management initiative that awards the same Secure Score points. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Mark the improvement action as resolved through a third party and attach the implementation evidence. For a non-device Secure Score improvement action satisfied by an equivalent external control, the third-party resolution status records that another product supplied the mitigation. Notes and evidence preserve attribution, while the status can reflect the action in Secure Score even though Microsoft has no visibility into implementation completeness. Accepted risk means the organization chose not to remediate, and marking the action as completed through Microsoft would misstate who implemented and verified the control. Use the improvement action status that matches the disposition. Third-party resolution records an external mitigation, while accepted risk records a decision not to remediate. Question 2 of 45. A Defender XDR incident correlates a malicious email, a user sign-in, and an endpoint alert. The endpoint was isolated, and the message was remediated. Responders suspect that the same command and control domain was contacted by other devices during the previous 14 days, including devices that generated no alert. The team needs a reusable detection that searches cross-workload telemetry now and continues to create alerts when matching activity appears. What should the administrator do? Option A. Start an automated investigation from the endpoint alert and configure it to search all Defender workloads for 14 days. Option B. Add the domain as an indicator in the Incidents, Evidence, and Response tab, then classify the incident as resolved. Option C. Run an advanced hunting query over the required time range, validate the returned entities, and create a custom detection rule from the query. Option D. Create a Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence watch list for the domain and assign the watch list to the incident. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Run an advanced hunting query over the required time range, validate the returned entities, and create a custom detection rule from the query. Advanced hunting queries can search available Defender XDR telemetry across supported tables and workloads for activity that did not already trigger an alert. After validating that the query returns the intended entities and timestamps, the team can turn it into a custom detection rule for continuing alert generation. This satisfies both retrospective scoping and prospective detection, a requirement containing both find activity that never alerted and alert on future matches points to advanced hunting followed by a custom detection rule, not merely incident evidence or automated investigation. Question 3 of 45. Fabricam will synchronize 3 on-premises ADDS forests to 1 Microsoft Entra tenant. A pilot export reports duplicate proxy addresses values across forests and user principal name values that contain characters rejected by Microsoft Entra ID. Some affected accounts already have cloud-only objects that the migration team intends to match during synchronization. The administrator must reduce initial synchronization failures without changing cloud objects or starting synchronization. Which action should be performed first? Option A. Delete the matching cloud-only objects and restore them after the first synchronization cycle. Option B. Enable staging mode on a Microsoft Entra Connect sync server and use synchronization rules to suppress every object reported by the pilot. Option C. Run ID fix against each on-premises directory. Review the error, attribute, and value findings, and remediate duplicate and formatting issues in ADDS. Option D. Configure alternate ID authentication so that invalid user principal name values are ignored during export. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Run ID fix against each on-premises directory, review the error, attack, and value findings, and remediate duplicate and formatting issues in ADDS. ID fix is a preparation tool for identifying directory attributes whose format or uniqueness will cause synchronization errors. The authoritative defects described are in on-premises ADDs, so they should be reviewed and corrected there before synchronization. Cloud object matching must be planned separately and does not remove the need for valid, unique source attributes. Before choosing or running a sync engine, treat invalid characters and non-unique proxy addresses as source directory hygiene. ID fix diagnoses preparation defects. Staging mode validates synchronization behavior later. Question 4 of 45. A weekly Defender XDR report shows that phishing detections doubled after a newly acquired subsidiary began mail migration. The report also shows that most detections were delivered to users rather than blocked. There is no single high-severity incident that explains the increase. The security team must determine whether the pattern is concentrated by recipient domain, detection technology, and delivery location before changing tenant-wide email protection. What should the administrator do next? Option A. Segment report events by recipient domain, detection technology, and delivery location, then inspect representative messages. Option B. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps activity policy scoped to the subsidiary's accepted domain. Option C. Run the Microsoft Secure Score history report and implement the highest point improvement action. Option D. Raise the severity of every phishing alert and merge the alerts into one Defender XDR incident. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Segment report events by recipient domain, detection technology, and delivery location. Then inspect representative messages. A report trend is aggregate evidence, not proof that one incident or one control caused the issue. Drilling into the report and filtering the underlying email events preserves the dimensions needed to determine scope and validate representative detections. The team can then make a targeted policy or operational change, rather than reacting tenant-wide to an unexplained aggregate. When the evidence is an aggregate report anomaly rather than a correlated incident, drill through and segment the underlying events before changing policy. Reports establish patterns, while detailed events establish scope and cause. Question 5 of 45. Northwind is creating a production Microsoft 365 tenant for a newly regulated subsidiary. Procurement has not yet purchased licenses, and the subsidiary's public DNS zone will remain unchanged until migration weekend. The architecture board requires the administrator to avoid foundational choices that are difficult or impossible to reverse after tenant creation. Which two values should be validated with the board before the tenant is created? Choose two. Option A, the custom public domain that will later be verified by DNS. Option B, the Microsoft 365 product licenses assigned to the first administrator. Option C, The initial onmicrosoft.com domain prefix whose original namespace remains in the tenant even if another fallback domain is later selected. Option D, the country or region selected for the organization. Option E, the tenant-wide SharePoint and OneDrive external sharing level. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C and D. Option C, the initial on Microsoft.com domain prefix whose original namespace remains in the tenant even if another fallback domain is later selected. Option D, the country or region selected for the organization. The organization, country, or region selected during creation is a foundational tenant choice associated with service and data location considerations, and cannot simply be changed afterward. The initial on Microsoft.com prefix creates an original tenant namespace that cannot be renamed or removed. Administrators can add another on Microsoft.com domain and make it the fallback, but the original remains. Custom domains, licenses, and sharing controls can be configured after the tenant exists, so they need not block creation under the stated constraints. Separate tenant birth attributes from post-creation configuration. Geography and the initial tenant namespace demand early governance, while custom domains, licenses, and workload policies can follow. Question 6 of 45. Contoso's threat intelligence team reviews a Microsoft Defender threat intelligence article describing an active ransomware campaign. The article lists attacker infrastructure and a published set of indicators. No Defender XDR incident currently links the campaign to Contoso, but executives want an evidence-based determination of whether the tenant has already encountered the published indicators before disruptive containment begins. Which action should the team take first? Option A. Start an automated investigation on all onboarded devices and isolate every device before establishing an indicator match. Option B. Create a Threat Explorer campaign view filtered only by ransomware verdict and treat every returned email as attribution to the campaign. Option C. Increase the Microsoft Secure Score target and implement the campaign's related improvement actions before searching tenant telemetry. Option D. Run an advanced hunting query across relevant Defender XDR telemetry for the published indicators and time range. Then pivot matching results to affected entities and incidents. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Run an advanced hunting query across relevant Defender XDR telemetry for the published indicators and time range. Then pivot matching results to affected entities and incidents. Defender Threat Intelligence supplies external, evidence-based campaign context and indicators. Advanced hunting is the decisive bridge to the organization's own cross-domain telemetry. Searching the specified indicators and time range establishes whether there is tenant exposure and identifies entities that can support scoped investigation and response. Containment should follow evidence unless an immediate, independently established risk requires emergency action. When external threat intelligence must be validated against your environment, translate the report's indicators and time window into a hunt over tenant telemetry before choosing scoped response actions. Question 7 of 45. Fabricam synchronizes one Active Directory forest to Microsoft Entra ID by using Microsoft Entra Connect Sync on a server in its primary data center. The company is acquiring a subsidiary whose separate forest cannot establish network connectivity to the primary data center. The subsidiary requires password hash synchronization and wants synchronization agents deployed redundantly on existing domain-joined servers. Operations must avoid adding another full synchronization server and SQL dependency. Which design best satisfies the requirements? Option A. Deploy multiple Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync provisioning agents in the subsidiary forest and configure a Cloud Sync configuration for that forest. Option B. Extend the existing Connect Sync configuration to the subsidiary forest without deploying any component in that forest. Option C. Install a second active Microsoft Entra Connect Sync server in the subsidiary and export to the same tenant concurrently. Option D. Deploy a Connect Sync server in staging mode in the subsidiary and use staging mode as the permanent export path. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Deploy multiple Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync provisioning agents in the subsidiary forest and configure a Cloud Sync configuration for that forest. Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync uses lightweight on-premises provisioning agents and supports deploying multiple agents for availability. A cloud-managed configuration for the disconnected subsidiary forest avoids requiring that forest to reach Fabricam's existing Connect Sync server, and avoids introducing another full Connect Sync installation and its associated database footprint. Choose the synchronization engine from topology and operations constraints. Lightweight redundant agents and cloud-managed configuration point to Cloud Sync. Staging mode is failover preparation, not an active export mechanism. Question 8 of 45. A global manufacturer must detect unpublished project identifiers in Microsoft 365 content. A valid identifier has the form PRJ- followed by 8 digits. Legal requires the identifier to appear within 200 characters of either the phrase acquisition target or codename. Testing shows that matching the identifier alone produces many false positives in archived engineering data. Which custom sensitive information type design best meets the requirement while preserving explainable matching logic? Option A. Create a trainable classifier from examples of acquisition documents and omit the identifier pattern. Option B. Use document fingerprinting on one blank acquisition template and classify every document that shares its layout. Option C. Create a keyword list containing every possible PRJ identifier and use the legal phrases as primary elements. Option D. Use a PRJ 0-9-8 primary regex, the legal phrases as supporting keywords, and require 200 character proximity at the chosen confidence level. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Use a PRJ 8 primary regex, the legal phrases as supporting keywords, and require 200 character proximity at the chosen confidence level. A custom sensitive information type can combine a regex primary element with supporting keyword evidence and proximity. The regex expresses the stable identifier structure, while nearby legal phrases raise confidence and suppress unrelated engineering matches. This directly implements the stated deterministic rule and remains auditable. For a deterministic token whose meaning depends on nearby language, make the structured token the primary regex and use keywords plus proximity as corroborating evidence, rather than replacing the rule with document-level classification. Question 9 of 45. Northwind is migrating the custom domain northwind.example from a legacy Microsoft 365 tenant to a new tenant after a divestiture. The domain is still configured as the primary SMTP domain for users, groups, and proxy addresses in the legacy tenant. The DNS zone is hosted by an external registrar, and the migration team has already copied the desired Exchange Online DNS records into a change plan. The team attempts to add and verify the domain in the new tenant, but Microsoft 365 reports that the domain is already in use. What should the administrator do next? Option A. Remove all legacy tenant references to the domain, remove the domain there, and then add and verify it in the new tenant. Option B. Add the domain as an internal relay domain in Exchange Online in both tenants until migration is complete. Option C. Create a matching Microsoft Entra custom domain in the new tenant by using the same TXT verification record while leaving the old tenant configuration unchanged. Option D. Publish the new tenant's MX and auto-discover records first. Domain ownership will transfer automatically after DNS propagation. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Remove all legacy tenant references to the domain, remove the domain there, and then add and verify it in the new tenant. A custom domain cannot normally be attached to two Microsoft Entra/Microsoft 365 tenants at the same time. Before removing it from the source tenant, Every dependency on that suffix must be changed. After the source tenant releases the domain, the target tenant can add and verify ownership. Service DNS cutover can then be performed according to the migration plan. Separate domain ownership from workload routing. Clear source tenant object dependencies and release the domain before target verification. MX and auto-discover changes do not move tenant ownership. Question 10 of 45. Contoso Maritime has a single Microsoft Entra tenant and 2 on-premises ADDS forests. Headquarters identities are synchronized by Microsoft Entra Connect Sync using an active server and a staging server. A recently acquired subsidiary is provisioned by Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync through 2 agents. Operations requires centralized health monitoring without granting staff interactive access to synchronization servers. At the same time, the security team is hardening Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Executives need a targeted protection configuration, while the existing broad baseline must remain in force for all other users. Changes must minimize disruption and preserve evidence for incident response. Following a WAN change, operations must receive centralized notification when Connect Health detects that the active Connect Sync service or export is unhealthy. The team must also identify affected objects and attribute conflict details when duplicate attribute synchronization failures recur. Staff should obtain both evidence types through Microsoft Entra Connect Health rather than signing in to the server. Which 2 Connect Health capabilities should the team use? Choose 2. Option A. Run the Microsoft Entra Connect Synchronization Service Manager Metaverse search on the active server. Option B. Review the Connect Health Synchronization Errors report and open the affected object details. Option C. Use Microsoft Entra sign-in logs filtered to the synchronization service account. Option D. Review the Microsoft 365 Service Health dashboard and configure an Exchange Online advisory notification. Option E. Configure Microsoft Entra Connect Health alert notifications for the synchronization service. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and E. Option B. Review the Connect Health Synchronization Errors report and open the affected object details. Option E. Configure Microsoft Entra Connect Health alert notifications for the synchronization service. Connect Health alert notifications provide centralized notice when the monitored synchronization service enters a documented unhealthy state. The Synchronization Errors report supplies object-level error categories and details for recurring duplicate attribute failures. Together, they cover service health and object evidence without requiring routine server access. The scenario does not imply a configurable 30-minute export alert threshold. Separate health state detection from object-level synchronization evidence. Connect Health alerts answer whether the service is unhealthy, while its sync error views answer which objects failed and why. Question 11 of 45. Contoso's broad custom safe attachments and safe links policies already protect all recipients. Executives must instead receive attachments with dynamic delivery and must have URLs checked at click time, including links in Teams. The change must apply only to the executive protection group and must take precedence over the broad custom policies. Which configuration best meets the protection and scope requirements while leaving the broad baseline unchanged? Option A. Edit the built-in protection policy to enable dynamic delivery and Teams URL scanning, and add executive protection as a recipient exception. Option B. Create higher priority safe attachments and safe links policies scoped to executive protection, with dynamic delivery and click time Teams URL checks. Option C. Add the executives to the tenant block list and configure the broad safe attachments policy to monitor mode. Option D. Create a mail flow rule for executive protection that sets the spam confidence level to 9 and enables URL detonation. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create higher priority safe attachments and safe links policies scoped to executive protection with dynamic delivery and QuickTime Teams URL checks. Safe attachments and safe links are separate Defender for Office 365 threat policy layers. Targeted custom policies can apply the required attachment and time-of-click URL behavior to the executive group. Their rules must be ordered ahead of broader custom rules so the executive-specific configuration wins without changing protection for other recipients. When the requirement names both attachment disposition and QuickTime URL behavior, configure both threat policy families. Then reason about recipient scope and custom policy priority separately. Question 12 of 45. The acquired subsidiary's 2 Cloud Sync agents are healthy. Provisioning logs show that a newly created user is skipped because the object is not in scope. The user was created in OU equals contractors, but the Cloud Sync configuration scopes only OU equals employees. Headquarters Connect Sync must not import subsidiary objects. What should the identity team do first to provision the user while preserving the synchronization tool boundary? Option A. Move one Cloud Sync agent into staging mode and force an export from the other agent. Option B. Add the subsidiary forest to the Headquarters Connect Sync connector and run an initial synchronization cycle. Option C. Clear the user must change password at next logon setting and restart both Cloud Sync agents. Option D. Add OU equals contractors to the subsidiary Cloud Sync scope and let the next provisioning cycle reevaluate the user. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Add OU equals contractors to the subsidiary Cloud Sync scope and let the next provisioning cycle reevaluate the user. The healthy agent evidence rules out agent availability, and the provisioning log identifies scope as the decisive boundary. Expanding the Cloud Sync configuration to include the intended OU lets Cloud Sync reevaluate the object while keeping the subsidiary out of the Headquarters Connect Sync topology. Treat a provisioning log not in scope result as configuration evidence, not an agent health symptom. Troubleshoot each synchronization engine with its own scope and operating model. Question 13 of 45. A multinational organization has Microsoft 365 E5. All Europe operations users carry the custom user tag Europe-operations. A regional messaging team must be alerted only when the same tagged user triggers at least 5 matching outbound spam events within 1 hour. A single event must not notify the team, and existing anti-spam enforcement must remain unchanged. What should the security administrator configure? Option A. Create a safe links policy scoped to Europe operations and set user clicks to generate alerts. Option B. Create an alert policy for the Europe operations user tag with a 5 events per hour threshold and regional notifications. Option C. Modify the outbound spam filter policy action and add the regional team as notification recipients. Option D. Create a threat tracker for outbound spam and assign the regional team to the tracker. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create an alert policy for the Europe operations user tag with a 5 events per hour threshold and regional notifications. With the qualifying E5 entitlement, an alert policy can use advanced threshold and aggregation settings independently of anti-spam enforcement. Scoping the policy to the stated Europe operations user tag, setting 5 activities within 1 hour for the same actor, and configuring the regional recipients implements the required detection without changing message handling. When the requirement specifies activity, scope, threshold, time window, and recipients without changing enforcement, use an alert policy, not a threat protection policy or investigation view. Question 14 of 45. A security analyst confirms that a credential phishing campaign delivered messages to 340 mailboxes before the URL was classified as malicious. Some users forwarded the message internally. Legal requires the original messages to remain recoverable while the incident is investigated. And the response lead means auditable status for the bulk remediation. What should the analyst do? Option A. In Threat Explorer, find delivered and forwarded copies by URL, soft delete the selected messages, and track the remediation in Action Center. Option B. Submit one message to Microsoft as clean and add the sender domain to the tenant allow block list allow entries. Option C. In Threat Explorer, select only the original campaign messages and use hard delete so users cannot recover the content. Option D. Create an attack simulation training campaign with the same URL and use its completion report as proof that the delivered messages were removed. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. In Threat Explorer, find delivered and forwarded copies by URL, soft delete the selected messages, and track the remediation in Action Center. Threat Explorer supports investigation pivots and bulk remediation of discovered messages. Pivoting on the URL helps include forwarded copies rather than only the original sender set. Soft delete removes messages from user view while retaining recoverability, and the Action Center provides status and auditability for the remediation action. For post-delivery response, distinguish discovery scope, remediation disposition, and action tracking. Find all copies, choose soft versus hard delete from the recovery requirement, then verify the bulk actions centrally. Question 15 of 45. Fabricam is preparing a tenant-wide administrative handoff. The Microsoft 365 team must route end-user support away from Microsoft, publish the privacy contact user should see, and allow a pilot group to receive targeted Microsoft 365 releases before everyone else. Match each requirement to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center organizational setting that should be configured. Each target may be used once. Requirements. R1. Display Fabricam's internal support contact information to users who request help. R2. Publish the organization's privacy statement URL and privacy contact. R3. Deliver targeted release features to a designated pilot group before standard release. Targets. T1. Privacy profile. T2. Organization information. T3. Release preferences. T4. Data location. T5. Help desk information. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T5. Display Fabricam's internal support contact information to users who request help. Maps to help desk information. R2 maps to T1. Publish the organization's privacy statement URL and privacy contact. Maps to privacy profile. R3 maps to T3. Deliver targeted release features to a designated pilot group before standard release. Maps to release preferences. Help desk information controls the support details presented to users. Privacy profile is the organization-facing setting for privacy statement and contact details. Release preferences controls standard release versus targeted release, and can scope targeted release to selected users. These are distinct tenant-level governance services, even though they are grouped under organizational settings. Do not treat org settings as one undifferentiated profile. Map the user-facing outcome to the narrow tenant surface, support routing, privacy publication, or release ring control. Question 16 of 45. Contoso is onboarding 600 field engineers to passwordless authentication. The engineers receive new devices at remote sites and have no previously registered strong authentication method. Help desk staff must not know the engineer's passwords, and any bootstrap credential must be short-lived and usable for registering a passkey or Microsoft Authenticator. What should the identity administrator configure? Option A. Enable email one-time passcode for the engineers and use it to register their passkeys. Option B. Enable SMS in the authentication methods policy and require each engineer to register a phone before first sign-in. Option C. Create a conditional access policy that requires phishing-resistant MFA during the engineer's first authentication method registration. Option D. Enable temporary access pass in the authentication methods policy for the engineers, and have authorized staff issue time-limited passes for onboarding. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Enable temporary access pass in the authentication methods policy for the engineers, and have authorized staff issue time-limited passes for onboarding. Temporary Access Pass, TAP, is the Microsoft Entra bootstrap mechanism designed for users who need to register passwordless authentication methods without first possessing another strong method. TAP must first be enabled and scoped in the authentication methods policy. An authorized administrator can then create a short-lived pass for each user. The user can sign in with that pass and register a passkey or Microsoft Authenticator without the help desk learning or resetting the user's password. A grant control that already demands phishing-resistant MFA cannot create the missing bootstrap method. SMS and email one-time passcode are different authentication mechanisms and do not satisfy the stated passwordless registration bootstrap requirement. When a user has no usable strong method yet, but must enroll a passwordless one without exposing a password, look for a bootstrap credential in the authentication methods policy. Temporary access pass breaks the registration dependency. Question 17 of 45. A regulated engineering firm stores project records in SharePoint sites. Every document for a project must be retained for 7 years, beginning on that project's contract closure date. Closure dates differ by project and can occur years after documents are created or last modified. The records team can stamp each document with a project identifier, and the contract system can provide each closure date. Which retention design meets the requirement without creating one policy per project? Option A. Create an adaptive retention policy whose membership query uses the project identifier, and change the policy's retention duration whenever a project closes. Option B. Create one retention label that starts retention when items are labeled, and publish it to all project sites. Option C. Use one event-based retention label and event type. For each closure, submit the project ID and closure date as the matching event. Option D. Create a static SharePoint retention policy that retains all project sites for 7 years from each item's last modification date. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Use one event-based retention label and event type. For each closure, submit the project ID and closure date as the matching event. Event-based retention separates classification from the business event that starts the clock. Items receive a retention label and an asset or event identifier for the project. When the contract closes, the records team creates an event of the associated event type with a project identifier and closure date. Matching labeled content then begins its 7-year retention period from that event. One reusable label and event type can therefore serve many projects with different closure dates. Creation, modification, or labeling dates are item lifecycle dates, not the contract closure date. Adaptive scope controls which locations or users a policy includes. It does not turn a business event supplied by a contract system into a separate retention trigger for each matching project's content. If a retention clock starts from a business milestone that is external to the item's created, modified, or labeled dates, bind an event-based label to an event type and correlate the event to content with an identifier. Question 18 of 45. Contoso publishes a sensitivity label named Restricted to its merger team. For files and emails, Restricted applies encryption and a visual marking. The collaboration team now wants the same label name available when owners create Microsoft Teams teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and SharePoint sites. At the container level, it must enforce private membership and restrict external user access. Existing labeled documents must keep their current file level protection. What should the compliance administrator do? Option A. Add the groups in site scope to restricted, configure private membership and external user access, and republish it to the merger team. Option B, replace restricted with a retention label that marks content as a regulatory record and publish it to the merger team's sites. Option C, change the restricted label's file encryption permissions so that only Microsoft 365 group owners can open labeled content. Option D, add SharePoint and Teams locations to an auto-labeling policy that detects the restricted visual marking. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Add the groups and sites scope to restricted, configure private membership and external user access, and republish it to the merger team. A sensitivity label can be configured for more than one scope. File and email settings protect content, while the groups and sites scope applies governance settings to containers such as Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and sites. Extending the existing label to the container scope and configuring privacy and external user access preserves its file-level encryption and markings while adding the requested creation time container controls. The label must also remain published to the intended users. Container labeling does not automatically label or encrypt every file inside the container, and file encryption permissions do not set group privacy or site external sharing configuration. Retention labels govern retention and deletion, not sensitivity container settings. Treat one sensitivity label as scope-specific configuration. Files and emails protects items, while groups and sites governs the container. A container label does not inherit its settings into every file, nor do file permissions configure the container. Question 19 of 45. After a real phishing incident, Contoso's incident response process produces a Microsoft Entra group containing the 240 affected users. Compliance requires those users to complete 2 selected security awareness modules within 14 days. The security team must track completion, but it must not send a simulated phishing message or record an artificial click or credential entry event. What should the Defender for Office 365 administrator create? Option A, a payload automation that rotates phishing payloads but excludes all target mailboxes. Option B, a 14-day training campaign for the affected users group containing the 2 required modules. Option C, a credential harvest simulation using a benign payload and the affected users group. Option D, a simulation automation that assigns training after a user enters credentials. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, a 14-day training campaign for the affected users group containing the 2 required modules. A training campaign in attack simulation training assigns selected training directly to targeted users and provides campaign progress and completion reporting without first delivering a simulated attack. Targeting the incident-derived group, selecting the 2 required modules, and setting the campaign schedule addresses the remediation deadline while avoiding synthetic phishing interaction evidence. A simulation or simulation automation is appropriate when the organization intends to deliver a simulated attack and measure user behavior. Payload automation manages payload generation or harvesting. It does not directly satisfy a user training assignment and completion requirement. When the desired artifact is training assignment and completion without a lure, landing page, or synthetic user behavior, choose a training campaign rather than a simulation or simulation automation. Question 20 of 45. Contoso's operations team monitors Microsoft 365 incidents. Engineers currently discover incidents only after opening the Service Health dashboard. The operations manager requires proactive notifications for tenant-affecting service incidents through 2 independent user-facing channels: filtered email to the on-call mailbox and push notifications on the on-call engineer's phone. Planned feature announcements must not be treated as service incidents. Which 2 actions should the administrator take? Choose 2. Option A. Install the Microsoft 365 admin mobile app for the on-call account and enable its Service Health push notifications. Option B. In Service Health, configure email notification preferences for the required services and incident types, and add the on-call email address. Option C. Create a Microsoft Purview alert policy that detects publication of service incidents. Option D. Open a Microsoft support request and ask the support engineer to call whenever a new incident is posted. Option E. Configure Message Center email preferences for all major updates and send them to the on-call mailbox. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. Option A. Install the Microsoft 365 Admin mobile app for the on-call account and enable its Service Health push notifications. Option B. In Service Health, configure email notification preferences for the required services and incident types, and add the on-call email address. Service Health notification preferences provide the instance-specific email channel and can be scoped to the services and issue types the team operates. The Microsoft 365 Admin mobile app provides the separate mobile push notification channel for Service Health updates. Together, they satisfy proactive, two-channel notification without requiring engineers to pull the dashboard. Message Center communicates plan changes, features, and other administrative announcements rather than serving as the instant notification mechanism requested here. Purview alert policies monitor compliance-related activity, and support requests are reactive cases rather than a subscription to all new service incidents. Separate Microsoft-authored operational incidents from roadmap communication. Service Health supplies incident email and mobile push channels, while Message Center supplies planned change announcements. Question 21 of 45. Contoso synchronizes users from Active Directory domain services by using Microsoft Entra Connect Sync with password hash synchronization. SSPR is enabled for a pilot group, and authentication methods are registered. A pilot user successfully resets a password from the SSPR portal and can use the new password from Microsoft 365, but the user's domain-joined workstation still accepts only the old password when it contacts an on-premises domain controller. The identity team must make future SSPR password changes update ADDs while preserving the on-premises password policy. What should the team do? Option A. Enable user writeback so that the cloud user's password attribute is provisioned as part of normal object synchronization. Option B. Enable password writeback in Connect Sync and SSPR, and grant the connector account the required ADDS reset permissions. Option C. Change the synchronization sign-in method from password hash synchronization to pass-through authentication, and leave password writeback disabled. Option D. Configure Microsoft Entra Password Protection Proxy and DC agents, because password protection writes every cloud password change to ADDS. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Enable password writeback in Connect Sync and SSPR, and grant the connector account the required ADDS reset permissions. SSPR controls the cloud reset experience, but a hybrid user requires password writeback to send the new password to the authoritative on-premises directory. The feature must be enabled in the Microsoft Entra Connect configuration and allowed for SSPR in Microsoft Entra ID. The connector account also needs the required ADDS permissions. The password is then changed through the on-premises password reset path, so the applicable ADDS password policy is enforced. Password hash synchronization ordinarily moves password hashes from ADDS to Microsoft Entra ID. It does not reverse direction merely because a cloud reset occurred. Authentication transport and password quality enforcement are separate mechanism layers. In hybrid identity, separate the reset interface from the password's direction of travel. SSPR supplies the experience, while password writeback supplies the cloud to ADDS change path. Question 22 of 45. Fabricam deploys Microsoft Entra password protection in an ADDS forest that has 6 writable domain controllers across 3 sites. 2 proxy servers are registered for the forest, but the DC agent is installed on only one domain controller in the headquarters site. During a staged rollout, help desk tests show that a banned password is rejected on some password changes but accepted on others. Microsoft Entra password hash synchronization is healthy. The security team now requires consistent banned password enforcement for every password change in the domain. What should it do next? Option A. Increase the custom banned password list and wait for password hash synchronization to reject passwords accepted by unprotected domain controllers. Option B. Enable Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout for synchronized users and remove the existing password protection components. Option C. Install the password protection DC agent on every writable domain controller, complete required restarts, and verify agent health and policy retrieval. Option D. Install and register an additional proxy server in each site without changing the DC agent deployment. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Install the password protection DC agent on every writable domain controller, complete required restarts, and verify agent health and policy retrieval. The password filter and DC agent evaluate a proposed password on the domain controller that processes the password change. An incremental deployment therefore enforces Microsoft Entra password protection only when the request reaches a controller with the DC agent installed. Because clients can use any suitable writable domain controller, consistent domain-wide enforcement requires deployment to every writable controller and verification that those agents can obtain policy through the registered proxy service. The existing redundant proxies address policy download connectivity and availability. They cannot evaluate a password on behalf of a domain controller that lacks the DC agent. Password hash synchronization and smart lockout operate at different layers. For on-premises password protection, enforcement follows the domain controller that handles the change. Proxy redundancy distributes policy, but DC agent coverage determines where passwords are actually evaluated. Question 23 of 45. After a conditional access rollout, a finance administrator can sign in to the Microsoft 365 portal from a managed Windows device, but is repeatedly denied by one finance application from the same device. Other users can access the application. The administrator has recently completed MFA registration, and the help desk proposes resetting the password and all authentication methods immediately. The identity engineer must identify the policy or authentication step that denied the application sign-in, while minimizing disruption and preserving evidence. What should the engineer do first? Option A. Use the Microsoft 365 Service Health dashboard to determine which conditional access grant control denied the user. Option B. Inspect the failed application's Entra sign-in event, including authentication details and conditional access results. Correlate by time or ID if needed. Option C. Revoke all refresh tokens and delete the user's registered authentication methods before collecting sign-in evidence. Option D. Run Microsoft Entra Connect sync troubleshooting because a successful portal sign-in proves that the application's conditional access evaluation was bypassed. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Inspect the failed application's Entra sign-in event, including authentication details and conditional access results. Correlate by time or ID if needed. Microsoft Entra sign-in logs provide event-specific evidence for the affected user, application, client, device, authentication sequence, and conditional access evaluation. Starting with the failed event distinguishes an application-specific policy or authentication interruption from a tenant service incident or a credential problem. Correlation data also lets the engineer connect related records without destroying the user's current authentication state. A successful sign-in to a different resource does not prove that the failed application's policy scope, client conditions, or grant controls were identical. Remediation, such as revoking sessions or resetting methods, should follow the observed failure, rather than precede evidence collection. When one resource fails, but another succeeds, preserve state and inspect the failed resource's sign-in record. Conditional access and authentication evidence are evaluated per sign-in, not inferred from a nearby success. Question 24 of 45. Contoso's monthly sensitivity label report shows a sudden decline in items carrying the highly confidential label. Compliance must determine whether users downgraded or removed that label during the last 2 weeks, identify the actors and workloads involved, and avoid granting investigators permission to preview document contents. Which approach best meets the investigation requirement with least privilege? Option A. Use Activity Explorer to filter label change events by date, label, user, and location. Assign the Information Protection Analysts role group only. Option B. Export the label usage report and treat the aggregate count change as proof that a specific user removed labels. Option C. Use Content Explorer List View only because its current item locations contain the complete historical sequence of label changes and the responsible users. Option D. Use Content Explorer with the Content Explorer Content Viewer role and preview every currently unlabeled item to infer who removed the label. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Use Activity Explorer to filter label change events by date, label, user, and location. Assign the Information Protection Analysts role group only. Activity Explorer is the event-oriented surface for historical actions on labeled content. Filters for activity, date, label, user, and location identify who downgraded or removed the label and in which workload. The Information Protection Analyst role group is the least privileged named role group for this investigation and does not include the Content Explorer Content Viewer or content download permissions granted through the broader Information Protection Investigators role group. Label reports expose aggregate trends, while Content Explorer is item-oriented and cannot by itself prove the historical actor and action. Choose the Purview Explorer by evidence shape. Content Explorer answers where the items are. Activity Explorer answers what happened to labeled content, when and by whom. Reports expose aggregate trends. Question 25 of 45. Northwind Traders has a single Microsoft 365 tenant and 14 offices. Security Operations is responding to a password spray campaign while the network team investigates inconsistent Microsoft 365 performance. The tenant has Microsoft Entra ID P2 for workforce users. Service principals are not licensed for workload identity risk detection. A sales user's cloud mailbox appears on the restricted entities page after sending limits were exceeded. Sign-in evidence indicates stolen credentials. The user can receive mail, but outbound messages fail with 550 5.1.8. Separately, OneDrive synchronized Windows devices are deployed at every office, but several office locations are missing from network connectivity insights. The response leads secure the identity and then restore outbound mail without reopening the compromised session. The service-enforced sending restriction must not be removed until the cause is addressed. Which two actions should the team perform? Choose two. Option A. Revoke the user's active sessions, reset the compromised password, and ensure multi-factor authentication is enforced. Option B. Release the user's failed outbound messages from quarantine and submit them to Microsoft as false positives. Option C. Delete the user from the tenant allow block list so Exchange Online can resume outbound delivery. Option D. Raise the user's outbound spam policy sending limits before changing the credentials. Option E. After securing the account, remove the mailbox user from restricted entities and allow time for the restriction to clear. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and E. Option A. Revoke the user's active sessions, reset the compromised password, and ensure multi-factor authentication is enforced. Option E. After securing the account, remove the mailbox user from restricted entities, and allow time for the restriction to clear. First, contain the identity compromise by invalidating active sessions, replacing the stolen credential, and enforcing MFA. Only after the account is secured should an administrator remove the mailbox user from restricted entities. The service restriction can then take time to clear. This ordering restores sending without allowing an attacker who still controls a session or password to resume abuse. The 550 5.1.8 evidence and the user's continued ability to receive mail identify an outbound sending restriction, not message quarantine or a tenant allow block list entry. Changing thresholds before containment would weaken the control that detected the compromise. A restricted mailbox that still receives mail but gets 550 5.1.8 on send requires 2 layers in order. Contain the compromised identity, then remove the sender from restricted entities. Question 26 of 45. Network engineers confirm that WAN egress and public IP ranges can change during the SD-WAN rollout. They need per-office connectivity assessments for all 14 sites, with the least ongoing location maintenance. Managed OneDrive for Windows devices are regularly used on-site, and Privacy has approved Windows location services for this purpose. Which configuration should the team implement first, so Network Connectivity Insights can associate samples with offices despite changing egress addresses? Option A. Enable Network Connectivity Location Collection, so eligible OneDrive devices use Windows location services to discover office cities. Option B. Create each office manually, using only its current public egress IP address, and update the address after every SD-WAN change. Option C. Configure Service Health email notifications for Microsoft 365 network advisories at each office. Option D. Run a one-time Microsoft 365 network connectivity test from headquarters and assign its result to all 14 offices. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Enable Network Connectivity Location Collection, so eligible OneDrive devices use Windows location services to discover office cities. The approved location opt-in lets eligible OneDrive for Windows devices use Windows location services to discover office locations and contribute connectivity samples. This creates per-location insights without binding office identity to public egress addresses that the scenario says will change. Manual location definition can be appropriate when stable LAN subnet data is maintained, and an on-demand test can assess a particular office. Neither a headquarters-only test nor service health notifications creates continuing per-office client connectivity assessments. When office egress is unstable but managed, OneDrive devices and approved Windows location signals exist, prefer automatic location discovery over maintaining network address identity by hand. Question 27 of 45. The password spray review shows that workforce user and sign-in risks are visible in Microsoft Entra ID protection. Security also wants risk detections and a risky identities report for service principals before designing automated access controls. The tenant currently licenses Microsoft Entra ID P2 only for workforce users, and the team must not assume that user risk controls protect workload identities. What should the identity architect include in the plan? Option A. Replace Microsoft Entra ID protection with Defender for Cloud Apps anomaly policies, so one risk model covers users and service principals. Option B. Enable security defaults for service principals and use its MFA registration campaign as the workload risk remediation control. Option C. Reuse workforce user risk conditional access conditions for service principals, because Microsoft Entra ID P2 covers both identity types. Option D. Acquire sufficient workload identities premium licenses, evaluate workload risk separately, and retain user sign-in risk controls for employees. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Acquire sufficient workload identities premium licenses, evaluate workload risk separately, and retain user sign-in risk controls for employees. Identity protection separates workforce user and sign-in risk from workload identity risk. Microsoft Entra ID P2 supports the Workforce Risk Plan, while risky workload identities require sufficient workload identities premium licensing for the eligible workload identity population. Those licenses are procured by count and aren't assigned to individual service principals. The architect should evaluate workload risks separately while retaining the existing workforce controls. Whenever a scenario moves from employees to service principals, stop carrying over user risk assumptions. Workload identity risk has its own identity type, report, controls, and licensing boundary. Question 28 of 45. Contoso has a custom sensitive information type for unreleased acquisition codes. An existing DLP policy protects that type in Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. Security testing finds that a user can include an acquisition code in a Microsoft 365 Copilot prompt and cause Copilot to search the web. The requirement is to prevent web searches when the prompt contains that sensitive information, while still allowing Copilot to answer from permitted internal data and leaving the existing workload actions unchanged. What should the Purview administrator configure? Option A. Create a separate DLP policy for Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat. Match the custom SIT and prevent Copilot from performing web searches. Option B. Publish a mandatory sensitivity label to all users, and rely on the label policy to inspect unstructured text typed directly into Copilot prompts. Option C. Add Power BI to the existing DLP policy locations, because Power BI location coverage automatically governs every Microsoft 365 Copilot prompt. Option D. Create an Endpoint DLP rule that blocks clipboard operations in every browser, because Copilot prompt inspection is available only through endpoint restrictions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Create a separate DLP policy for Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat. Match the custom SIT and prevent Copilot from performing web searches. The Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat DLP location can inspect prompts for supported sensitive information types and restrict web search for matching prompts. Because selecting this location is exclusive of the other DLP locations, the administrator should use a separate custom policy for Copilot rather than extending the existing Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams policy. This blocks the external search path while preserving permitted responses grounded in internal data and leaves the existing workload actions unchanged. Treat Copilot as its own DLP location. Use a separate policy to restrict web search for sensitive prompts without replacing the rules that protect Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. Question 29 of 45. Tailspin Toys must onboard 600 persistent Windows 11 devices to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. The devices are domain joined, receive computer group policy, and are not enrolled in Microsoft Intune or managed by Configuration Manager. Operations requires a centrally assigned deployment that automatically reaches replacement devices placed in the same organizational units. A pilot package was validated on 5 devices. Which production onboarding method should the administrator use? Option A. Use the VDI onboarding script because replacement hardware makes the persistent devices equivalent to non-persistent VDI sessions. Option B. Deploy the Defender for Endpoint onboarding package through a computer-scoped group policy linked to the managed device organizational units. Option C. Create a Microsoft Intune endpoint detection and response policy and wait for the non-enrolled devices to check in. Option D. Run the local onboarding script interactively on all 600 devices using remote PowerShell. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Deploy the Defender for Endpoint onboarding package through a computer-scoped group policy linked to the managed device organizational units. Group policy is a supported onboarding method for Windows client devices and matches the management plane already present on all 600 domain-joined endpoints. Linking a computer scope deployment to the relevant OUs provides central assignment and naturally reaches replacement devices that enter the same scope. The local script is intended for small-scale evaluation and supports only a limited number of devices, while Intune policy requires an applicable management relationship. VDI scripts solve image session persistence concerns, not ordinary replacement of persistent physical devices. Choose the onboarding channel from both scale and the management plane that already reaches the fleet. A successful local script pilot does not make that script the enterprise deployment method. Question 30 of 45. Contoso has completed Defender for Endpoint onboarding. Microsoft Defender antivirus remains in passive mode on a coexistence ring. Incident responders need remote shell access only when authorized by Defender role permissions, and attackers have recently attempted to disable endpoint security settings. Match each operational requirement to the Defender for Endpoint advanced feature that directly supplies the required mechanism. Each target may be used once. Requirements. R1. Block malicious artifacts or behaviors detected by endpoint detection and response, even while Defender antivirus is passive. R2. Prevent unauthorized changes to protected security settings during an attack. R3. Allow appropriately permissioned responders to open an interactive remote investigation session on a device. Targets. T1. Enable device discovery. T2. Enable EDR in block mode. T3. Enable live response. T4. Enable web content filtering. T5. Enable tamper protection. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T2. Block malicious artifacts or behaviors detected by endpoint detection and response even while Defender antivirus is passive. Maps to enable EDR in block mode. R2 maps to T5. Prevent unauthorized changes to protected security settings during an attack. Maps to enable tamper protection. R3 maps to T3. Allow appropriately permissioned responders to open an interactive remote investigation session on a device. Maps to enable live response. EDR in block mode is the coexistence mechanism that can block malicious artifacts or behaviors found by EDR when Microsoft Defender antivirus is passive. Tamper protection protects security settings from unauthorized modification. Live response enables appropriately authorized operators to start remote sessions on devices. Role permissions remain a separate authorization dependency. Device discovery finds unmanaged devices on the network, and web content filtering controls access by web content category. Neither extra target supplies passive mode EDR blocking, settings integrity, or an interactive response channel. Separate three advanced feature verbs. EDR block mode blocks detected artifacts in passive coexistence. Tamper protection guards settings, and live response opens the permission-gated investigation channel. Question 31 of 45. Contoso synchronizes password hashes to Microsoft Entra ID and has enabled password write-back. All employees are registered for multi-factor authentication. Investigators find that accounts whose credentials appear in threat intelligence remain at high user risk until an administrator dismisses or confirms the risk. The identity team must automate self-remediation for these accounts, while avoiding a permanent block after a legitimate user proves control of the account. Which policy should the team implement? Option A. A conditional access sign-in risk policy that targets high sign-in risk and requires multi-factor authentication. Option B. A conditional access user risk policy that targets high user risk and uses the block access grant control. Option C. A conditional access user risk policy that targets high user risk and grants access only after the user completes risk remediation. Option D. An authentication strength policy that requires phishing-resistant MFA for every sign-in by a risky user. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C, a conditional access user risk policy that targets high user risk and grants access only after the user completes risk remediation. User risk represents the probability that the identity itself is compromised, which matches leaked credential evidence. A user risk conditional access policy with the risk remediation grant control lets a properly registered user complete secure password change. Because password hash synchronization and password writeback are enabled, that remediation can reset the synchronized user's password and return the user risk to a remediated state without waiting for an administrator. Requiring MFA for a risky sign-in can remediate sign-in risk, but it does not remediate the compromised identity user risk described here. Blocking high user risk prevents self-remediation, while an authentication strength proves use of a strong method, but does not replace the identity protection risk remediation workflow. Distinguish the risky event from the risky identity. MFA can remediate a risky sign-in, whereas compromised identity user risk calls for the user risk remediation control and its password reset dependencies. Question 32 of 45. Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management identifies a high-exposure browser vulnerability on 420 Intune managed Windows devices. The security team owns prioritization, but only the endpoint team may deploy application updates. Auditors require evidence that the recommendation was assigned to that team, given a due date, and tracked against the affected devices in Defender. The Defender for Endpoint Intune connection is already enabled. What should the security operator do from the security recommendation? Option A. Create a Microsoft Defender antivirus security intelligence update policy for the affected device group. Option B. Run an automated investigation on all exposed devices and approve every pending remediation action. Option C. Accept the risk for the recommendation until the endpoint team independently deploys the browser update. Option D. From the recommendation, submit an Intune remediation request for the affected group with the required priority and due date. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. From the recommendation, submit an Intune remediation request for the affected group with the required priority and due date. The remediation workflow on a Defender Vulnerability Management security recommendation can create a security task in Intune when the integration is configured. The operator scopes the exposed devices, selects Microsoft Intune as the remediation method, and records priority and due date. The endpoint team can then perform the deployment from its management plane, while Defender retains the request and remediation status as evidence against the recommendation and exposed devices. Antivirus intelligence updates do not patch a third-party browser. A risk acceptance exception suppresses or qualifies the recommendation, rather than assigning remediation. And automated investigation responds to suspicious endpoint evidence rather than serving as the vulnerability management task handoff. When security must prioritize but endpoint management must deploy, use the recommendation's remediation request to create an Intune security task. Do not confuse vulnerability handoff with AIR or risk acceptance. Question 33 of 45. Contoso manages Microsoft 365 apps updates through Cloud Update in the Microsoft 365 Apps Admin Center. Finance devices use monthly enterprise channel. A newly released build causes a line of business add-in failure, but only on finance devices. Operations must stop additional finance devices from receiving that build and return already updated finance devices to the preceding build, while preserving cloud update management and its device reporting. Which action should the administrator take? Option A. Use the Microsoft 365 Service Health dashboard to uninstall the build from the affected devices. Option B. Change the finance user's Microsoft 365 Apps Update channel to Semi-Annual Enterprise channel in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Option C. In the monthly enterprise channel profile, pause the update and initiate rollback to the previous release for the affected devices. Option D, disable Cloud Update for the tenant and configure an Office Deployment Tool XML file that pins the failed build. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. In the monthly enterprise channel profile, pause the update and initiate rollback to the previous release for the affected devices. Cloud Update provides update profile controls for supported channels, including pausing rollout and rolling devices back to the previous release. Applying those controls in the monthly enterprise channel profile stops further deployment of the problematic release and returns affected devices to the prior release while keeping the devices governed and monitored by Cloud Update. A channel migration changes the servicing cadence and is not the least disruptive response to one bad build. Disabling Cloud Update abandons the required management and reporting plane, and Service Health reports Microsoft service incidents, but cannot uninstall Microsoft 365 apps builds from tenant devices. For a bad Microsoft 365 apps release already governed by Cloud Update, pair pause with rollback inside the update profile. Do not redesign the channel or abandon the management plane. Question 34 of 45. Contoso has onboarded its Windows devices into Microsoft Purview and deployed an Endpoint DLP policy that detects engineering documents. The policy must block copying those documents to removable storage by default, but a set of company-issued encrypted USB drives must remain allowed. The approved drives have recorded serial numbers. Users may use them on any onboarded device. Which configuration meets the requirement without excluding users or devices from the DLP policy? Option A, add the approved drive's serial numbers as indicators in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and set each indicator action to allow. Option B, create a sensitive information type whose regular expression matches the approved drive's serial numbers and add it as an exception to the DLP rule. Option C, create an Endpoint DLP removable storage group from the approved serial numbers, allow that group, and block other USB storage in the rule. Option D, exclude every user who receives an approved drive from the Endpoint DLP policy, and use BitLocker policy to block all unencrypted drives. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create an Endpoint DLP removable storage group from the approved serial numbers. Allow that group and block other USB storage in the rule. Endpoint DLP settings can classify removable storage into groups by device properties, such as serial number. The Endpoint DLP rule can then apply the copy to removable USB device restriction differently to the approved storage group and to all other removable storage. This preserves inspection for the same users, content, and onboarded endpoints while allowing only the identified corporate drives. Defender indicators govern files, certificates, IP addresses, URLs, and domains, rather than creating Endpoint DLP removable storage exceptions. Excluding users removes DLP enforcement for all their USB activity, and sensitive information types classify document content, not destination hardware identifiers. When an endpoint DLP exception follows the peripheral rather than the user, endpoint, or document, classify the peripheral in Endpoint DLP settings and reference that device group in the activity restriction. Question 35 of 45. Contoso's adoption analyst must use Microsoft 365 Admin Center usage reports to compare active user and activity trends across services and export report data. The analyst must not manage tenant settings or see identifiable user, group, or site names in reports. The tenant currently displays identifiable names in usage reports. Which two actions should an administrator take? Choose two. Option A. In report settings, enable the option to display identifiable user, group, and site information in reports. Option B. Assign the usage summary reports reader role to the analyst and disable report export. Option C. In report settings, enable the option to display concealed user, group, and site names in all reports. Option D. Assign the global reader role to the analyst. Option E. Assign the reports reader role to the analyst. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C and E. Option C. In reports settings, enable the option to display concealed user, group, and site names in all reports. Option E. Assign the reports reader role to the analyst. Reports reader provides read access to usage reporting without the broad tenant-wide visibility of global reader and supports the analyst's reporting responsibility. The organization-level report setting that displays concealed names pseudonymizes user, group, and site values across usage reports, satisfying the privacy requirement while leaving aggregate service activity and trend data available for analysis and export. The role assignment supplies access. The privacy setting controls how identities appear, so both actions are applicable. Global Reader grants substantially broader read access than this job requires. Enabling identifiable information does the opposite of the requirement, while Usage Summary Reports Reader is intended for aggregate usage summaries and does not fit the stated need to use the full Admin Center usage reports and export their report data. Separate report authorization from report privacy. Use a reporting-specific reader role for access. Then use the tenant reports setting to pseudonymize identities without removing aggregate usage evidence. Question 36 of 45. A ransomware incident encrypted documents throughout a protected SharePoint online site. The security team has identified a clean restore point. The business accepts rolling back the entire site and wants users to return to the existing site URL as quickly as possible. A Microsoft Purview retention policy must remain unchanged. Which restore configuration best meets the requirements? Option A. Restore the full SharePoint site to a new URL and redirect users after validating the copy. Option B. Shorten the Purview retention policy to the clean point in time, and then restore the retained site content in place. Option C. Run an Exchange Online granular item restore and specify the SharePoint site URL as the destination. Option D. Restore the full SharePoint site in place to the same URL and select a recommended express restore point. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Restore the full SharePoint site in place to the same URL and select a recommended express restore point. Microsoft 365 Backup supports full SharePoint site recovery. Because the business accepts a site-wide rollback, requires the existing URL, and prioritizes recovery speed, an in-place restore using a recommended express restore point is the best fit. Microsoft documents that same URL restores using recommended express restore points typically provide the fastest SharePoint recovery. Backup restore points are isolated from Microsoft Purview retention and deletion policies, so the retention policy neither needs nor should be changed. Exchange granular item recovery applies to mailbox items, not SharePoint sites. A new URL restore is useful when a parallel copy is required, but it adds a destination and user cutover dependency that contradicts the stated priority. For a whole protected SharePoint site where rollback is acceptable, combine the destination constraint with a recovery time constraint. Same URL plus a recommended express restore point favors in-place recovery. Question 37 of 45. A supplier's Microsoft Entra B2B guest account belongs to project groups and has direct enterprise application assignments. The supplier changed the consultant's sign-in email after an acquisition, and redemption with the old identity can no longer succeed. The administrator must send a new invitation to the new email while preserving the guest object's group memberships, app assignments, and object ID. What should the administrator do? Option A. Change only the guest object's user principal name to the new email address. Option B. Create a second guest for the new email and convert the original guest to a member user. Option C. Delete the guest, permanently purge the deleted object, and invite the new email address. Option D. Reset the guest user's redemption status, specify the new email address, and send the new invitation. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Reset the guest user's redemption status, specify the new email address, and send the new invitation. Resetting redemption status is designed for a B2B guest whose sign-in identity or identity provider must change. The administrator can specify the new email and re-invite the user while retaining the existing directory objects' object ID, group memberships, and app assignments. After redemption, the sign-in name changes to the new email, even though the guest UPN does not change. Deleting and recreating the guest creates a different object, and therefore breaks object-bound access. Editing only the UPN does not reset the invitation-redemption relationship, and creating a second object duplicates the identity rather than preserving it. When a B2B collaborator changes sign-in identity, but object-bound authorization must survive, reset redemption status rather than delete and recreate the guest. Question 38 of 45. A Microsoft 365 app connector in Defender for Cloud Apps shows connected, and Microsoft 365 activities are appearing in the activity log. Investigators can find SharePoint file activities, but no files appear on the Files page, so a planned file policy cannot evaluate file metadata. The security team must retain the existing connector and avoid deploying network log collectors. Which configuration should the administrator verify and enable? Option A, Microsoft Purview audit retention for SharePoint file events. Option B, Defender for Cloud Apps file monitoring for the connected Microsoft 365 app. Option C, Conditional Access app control session monitoring for every SharePoint session. Option D, Cloud Discovery continuous reports for all perimeter firewalls. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, Defender for Cloud Apps file monitoring for the connected Microsoft 365 app. The evidence separates two data planes. Audited activities are already arriving through the connected Microsoft 365 app, while the Defender for Cloud Apps file inventory is absent. Microsoft requires file monitoring to be enabled for connected Microsoft 365 files to appear and support file policy evaluation. The administrator should enable that setting using an appropriately privileged Entra account while retaining the working connector. Cloud Discovery analyzes traffic logs to discover cloud app usage. It does not populate the connected app's files page. Conditional Access app control governs sessions, and Purview audit retention governs audit record retention. Neither replaces the app connector's file monitoring capability. A connected status plus visible activities proves activity ingestion, not file inventory. If file policies lack files, check the connector's separate file monitoring setting. Question 39 of 45. Defender for Cloud Apps receives Microsoft 365 activities through an app connector. Security wants one high-severity alert when the same user performs at least 10 failed sign-ins within 2 minutes. A single failed sign-in must not alert, and the rule must evaluate only activities that occur after the policy is created. Which policy design meets the requirement most directly? Option A. Create an activity policy filtered to failed sign-ins. Use repeated activity with a threshold of 10 in 2 minutes, and enable high-severity alerts. Option B. Create a file policy with a failed sign-in activity filter and enable governance actions after 10 file matches. Option C. Create an activity policy filtered to failed sign-ins. Use single activity and set the daily alert limit to 10. Option D. Create a Cloud Discovery anomaly policy for unsanctioned apps and scope it to the Microsoft 365 connector. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Create an activity policy filtered to failed sign-ins. Use repeated activity with a threshold of 10 in 2 minutes and enable high-severity alerts. An activity policy can filter connected app activity and use the repeated activity match parameter to require a specified count within a specified period. Configuring 10 failed sign-ins in 2 minutes and enabling a high-severity alert expresses the requested user, count, window, and alert behavior. Activity policy alerts are generated for activities occurring after policy creation, which also satisfies the evidence boundary. A daily alert limit caps notifications. It does not aggregate 10 events into one detection. File policies evaluate files, while cloud discovery anomaly policies analyze discovered app usage rather than this precise sequence of connected Microsoft 365 sign-in activities. Do not confuse notification throttling with detection aggregation. A count plus time window over connected app events requires an activity policy's repeated activity parameters. Question 40 of 45. Fabricam is integrating a newly acquired business that will remain in a separate Microsoft 365 tenant for 6 months. Procurement employees in Fabricam need to find 18 acquisition vendor coordinators in the address book and include them in a procurement distribution list. The coordinators must continue receiving mail in their existing external mailboxes. They do not need to sign into Fabricam or access its resources. Fabricam also needs a procurement address that 6 internal employees can open in Outlook and use to send replies as that address. Identity engineering is preparing conditional access coverage for the employees who will access Fabricam resources. An administrator must represent the 18 coordinators in Fabricam with no unnecessary identities or licenses and make them eligible for membership in the procurement distribution list. Which 2 actions should the administrator perform? Choose 2. Option A. Create an unlicensed member user for each coordinator and configure mailbox forwarding to the external address. Option B. Create a mail contact for each coordinator in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center using the coordinator's existing external email address. Option C. Invite each coordinator as a B2B guest and assign Exchange Online Plan 1 so the guest appears in the address book. Option D. Add the resulting mail contacts as members of the procurement distribution list. Option E. Create one shared mailbox for the coordinators and add their external addresses as mailbox delegates. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and D. Option B. Create a mail contact for each coordinator in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center using the coordinator's existing external email address. Option D. Add the resulting mail contacts as members of the procurement distribution list. Mail contacts are the correct recipient objects for people outside the organization who should remain at external email addresses but be visible in the organization's address book. Creating the 18 contacts with their existing external addresses supplies those directory recipients. And adding the contacts to the procurement distribution list lets internal senders address the group without creating sign-in identities. Neither action requires an Exchange Online license for a coordinator. The scenario asks only for mail routing, address book visibility, and distribution list membership. User or guest identities would add an unnecessary authentication surface, while forwarding presupposes a mailbox and shared mailbox delegation does not accept arbitrary external addresses as delegates or create 18 individually searchable contact entries. When an external person needs address book presence and group mail delivery, but no tenant sign-in, choose a mail contact. Do not manufacture a user, guest, or mailbox identity. Question 41 of 45. The procurement address is implemented as an unlicensed shared mailbox. The 6 internal employees must open its folders in Outlook and send replies that show the shared mailbox itself in the From field. They do not need to change mailbox permissions or send on behalf of the address. Which permission configuration meets the requirement with the least privilege? Option A. Grant the 6 employees send as permission only and enable email forwarding to their personal mailboxes. Option B. Grant the 6 employees full access and send as permissions on the shared mailbox. Option C. Grant the 6 employees full access and send on behalf permissions on the shared mailbox. Option D. Convert the shared mailbox to a Microsoft 365 group and make the 6 employees group owners. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Grant the 6 employees full access and send as permissions on the shared mailbox. Full access lets each employee open and work with the shared mailbox contents, but it does not grant permission to send from that mailbox. Send as separately allows a reply to appear as though the shared mailbox sent it, which exactly matches the from field requirement. Granting both permissions to the 6 workers supplies the 2 required capabilities without granting ownership or administrative rights. Send on behalf changes the visible sender semantics. Forwarding does not provide interactive folder access, and replacing the requested shared mailbox collaboration model with a Microsoft 365 group changes the service object rather than assigning the required mailbox permissions. Shared mailbox permissions are additive. Full access opens content, while send as controls sender identity. Send on behalf is observably different to recipients. Question 42 of 45. Identity engineering plans to require multi-factor authentication when the procurement employees and other workforce users access Microsoft 365 resources. 2 cloud-only emergency access accounts must remain usable if the policy is misconfigured. The team needs evidence of likely effects before enforcement and must target the identities that actually authenticate, not recipient objects. Which conditional access deployment plan best satisfies these requirements? Option A. Enable security defaults for the tenant and create a conditional access exclusion for every administrator and shared mailbox delegate. Option B. Target the shared mailbox and all mail contacts. Require multi-factor authentication and immediately enable the policy because these objects receive procurement mail. Option C. Target workforce users and Microsoft 365 resources. Exclude both emergency accounts, start in report only, and review impact before enabling. Option D. Target all users and Microsoft 365 resources. Include the emergency access accounts and use the what if tool as the only validation before enabling the policy. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Target workforce users and Microsoft 365 resources. Exclude both emergency accounts, start in report only, and review impact before enabling. Conditional access evaluates authenticating identities requesting tokens for target resources. The workforce users, including the 6 shared mailbox delegates, are therefore the relevant subjects. Mail contacts do not sign in, and normal shared mailbox use occurs through the delegates' identities, rather than direct shared mailbox authentication. A broad Microsoft 365 resource scope, explicit emergency access exclusions, and report-only deployment provide appropriate coverage, recovery protection, and observed impact evidence before enforcement. What if analysis is useful but does not replace report-only observations from real sign-ins? Security defaults is a tenant baseline rather than a substitute for this scoped plan, and blanket administrator exclusions would create unnecessary coverage gaps. Plan conditional access around the identity that requests the token. Then pair narrow break glass exclusions with report-only evidence before broad enforcement. Question 43 of 45. A user is included in 2 enabled conditional access policies. Policy CA-admin requires a compliant device for all cloud apps and excludes the emergency access accounts, but not this user. Policy CA-payroll targets the payroll app, requires multi-factor authentication, and excludes the user during a short migration. The user signs into the payroll app from an unmanaged device and completes MFA, but access is blocked for device non-compliance. What should the administrator change if the approved exception is intended to bypass both requirements only for this user and only for the payroll app? Option A. Add the user to CA-admin's emergency access exclusion, because CA Payroll's app scope will limit that exclusion to payroll. Option B. Change CA Payroll from on to report only, because its user exclusion is not being honored. Option C. Exclude the payroll app from CA-admin, because the exclusion will affect only users who are also excluded from CA Payroll. Option D, exclude the user from CA admin, then add a policy for that user requiring compliance for all resources except payroll. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Exclude the user from CA admin, then add a policy for that user requiring compliance for all resources except payroll. Conditional Access evaluates all applicable enabled policies, and controls from those policies are cumulative. Excluding the user from CA payroll prevents that policy's MFA requirement from applying, but it does not exclude the user from CA admin. CA admin still targets the user and payroll, so its compliant device grant blocks the unmanaged device. No exclusion in one policy inherits or intersects with the scope of another policy. To form the approved user and app exception without weakening coverage for other users or other apps, exclude the user from the broad CA admin policy and replace that user's device coverage with the policy targeting the user across all cloud apps except payroll. The existing CA payroll user exclusion removes MFA only for that user, while CA payroll still covers everyone else. The resulting exception is therefore limited to the required user resource intersection. Conditional access exclusions are local to one policy. Map the unexpected block to every still applicable policy, then place the exception at the narrowest user or resource boundary that produces the intended intersection. Question 44 of 45. Contoso assigns Microsoft 365 E3 to the licensing EMEA group. Licensing EMEA contains 3 country security groups, but no user accounts directly. Administrators expected all 420 users in those country groups to inherit E3, but they remain unlicensed. As a test, 12 users are added directly to licensing EMEA. 7 receive E3, and 5 appear on the product's Errors and Issues tab with an insufficient licenses error. Which 2 actions address the 2 established causes while preserving group-based administration? Choose 2. Option A, acquire or free enough E3 seats, then reprocess failed direct member assignments if needed. Option B, select reprocess repeatedly for the 420 nested users until Microsoft Entra expands the country groups. Option C, convert licensing EMEA to a dynamic device group so licenses follow the user's Windows devices. Option D, make all 420 users direct members of groups assigned E3. Don't rely on nested membership. Option E, assign E3 directly to each unlicensed user and remove E3 from licensing EMEA. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and D. Option A, acquire or free enough E3 seats, then reprocess failed direct member assignments if needed. Option D, make all 420 users direct members of groups assigned E3. Don't rely on nested membership. Group-based licensing does not expand nested groups. Only users that are direct members of a licensed group are processed. The country group members therefore need direct membership in a group that carries E3, which can be implemented without abandoning group-based administration. The successful assignments for 7 directly added users prove that direct membership reaches the licensing engine. The explicit insufficient licenses errors for the other 5 establish a separate capacity problem. Contoso must acquire or reclaim enough E3 seats and can then reprocess failed assignments if automatic processing has not cleared them. Repeated reprocessing cannot turn unsupported nested membership into supported scope or create subscription capacity. Direct per-user assignment would discard the required group model, and device groups cannot license user identities based on their devices. Separate assignment scope from assignment capacity. Nested users are outside group licensing expansion, while an insufficient licenses error for direct members proves a second seat count failure. Question 45 of 45. A Defender for Cloud Apps analyst is investigating activity from a connected cloud app. The analyst must distinguish a known egress range from threat intelligence categorization, identify obsolete client software without manually parsing every user agent string, and preserve the exact event payload received from the app as evidence. Match each evidence requirement to the activity log control that most directly produces it. Each target may be used once. Requirements. R1. Restrict the result set to activities associated with the organization's manually defined corporate egress IP range label. R2. Find activities identified as using an outdated browser or outdated operating system. R3. Inspect the unnormalized event data exactly as Defender for Cloud Apps received it from the connected app. Targets. T1. Filter by activity type. T2. Filter by IP address tag. T3. Open the activity drawer and select View Raw Data. T4. Filter by user agent tag. T5. Filter by IP address category. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T2. Restrict the result set to activities associated with the organization's manually defined corporate egress IP range label. Maps to filter by IP address tag. R2 maps to T4. Find activities identified as using an outdated browser or outdated operating system. Maps to filter by user agent tag. R3 maps to T3. Inspect the unnormalized event data exactly as Defender for Cloud Apps received it from the connected app. Maps to open the activity drawer and select View Raw Data. An IP address tag represents the label associated with configured IP ranges, so filtering on that tag isolates corporate egress. IP address category is a different field. Defender for Cloud Apps assigns it automatically from threat intelligence, although an administrator can override categorization in IP range settings. The user agent tag filter exposes classifications such as outdated browser and outdated operating system without requiring the analyst to interpret raw user agent values. Selecting View Raw Data in the activity drawer displays the actual data received from the app, which is the requested source level evidence. Activity type answers what operation occurred, not which configured network label, client age classification, or original payload applies. The analyst should therefore preserve the distinction among normalized filters, configured IP tags, threat intelligence categories, and raw event evidence. In the Cloud Apps activity log, tags label configured ranges, categories classify IPs, user agent tags classify clients, and View Raw Data exposes the received payload. You finished MS-102 Set 1. Treat every miss as evidence. Group misses by service boundary. Identify the constraint you overlooked and answer again from the requirement. That practice builds Microsoft 365 administrator judgment. Thanks for practicing with WebLizard Cert Lab. Review the full exam clues, revisit week objectives, and continue with MS-102 Practice Exam Set 2 when you are ready.